When I was back in Nova Scotia, a little quiet provincial Nova Scotia, I used to look longingly west, in part because of this man here, just desperate to get out here and get engaged and participate in the battles to protect wilderness and wildlife.
There was basically 100 wars going on and watersheds all over this province. Do you remember that period when logging trucks had sugar put in their gas tanks, and environmental activists had 303 bullets going through their plate glass window? First Nations were blockading and going to the courts, and it was a pretty difficult period.
Now I want to talk about some successes. Most remarkably, unlike every jurisdiction in North America, pretty much, we still retain today all of the large, charismatic megafauna that were here at the time of European settlement, including grizzly bears, cougars, wolves. Indeed, the province is now the last safe haven for most of the large species left on the continent.
Grow Harlan Brundtland with Our Common Future in 1987 had preached about every jurisdiction conserving at least 12% of its significant ecological areas.
The establishment of green belts and green zones of protected farmland, forests, watersheds, wetlands, and other green spaces around a number of cities in Canada, such as here in Metro Vancouver, has helped to protect natural capital and the associated essential ecosystem services that sustain the air and water quality, local food production, and the quality of life for millions of Canadians.
We were able to expand from the goal of at least 12%, 6% to 12%, over 500 parks in about a 5-6 year period.
Indeed, the ability to provide clean drinking water at minimal cost to ratepayers is an achievement that's been achieved here in Metro Vancouver as a result of the visionary thinking of earlier policymakers and planners who chose to protect the forests that blanket the North Shore Mountains.
The land in the Agricultural Land Reserve, the watersheds, and a whole series of other conservation measures. So 70% of Metro Vancouver is in the green zone. So we were able to, I think, to transform the way we dealt with each other. So we have a new mayor in Vancouver who's got the modest goal of Vancouver becoming the greenest city in the world. Not a bad starting point.
British Columbia has a rich legacy to protect, and yet the experts tell us that we're squandering our unique biological inheritance. Last year, a unique coalition of scientists called BioBC, a partnership of scientists and governments and NGOs, released the most comprehensive scientific review of the health of BC's wilderness and wildlife to date.
I'd like to present the results of Biodiversity BC and taking nature's pulse, the status of biodiversity in British Columbia.
The findings of the review are shocking. We found out that over 4 dozen species have disappeared from the province already. These scientists believe that a further 1,400 species, 43% of all known plants and animals in the province, are currently at risk of disappearing.
We are very vulnerable to rapid deterioration, and especially in light of climate change.
Metro Vancouver, for example, and the surrounding Lower Mainland was identified as a hotspot of species endangerment. For example, in Metro Vancouver, we have well over 100 species that are now designated by the province as being at risk.
Wetlands have been converted or degraded, and in particular in the 2 major drainage areas of concern, that being the Columbia and the Fraser River. Coastal Douglas fir is significantly at risk in the province. We have almost half of this zone has been converted.
Urban development, logging of our old-growth forests, pollutions, global warming, and other human impacts are destroying the homes and habitat of the wildlife that we are blessed with.
BC has a disproportionately high level of genetic diversity relative to its species diversity. So what? This gives the species that we do have in British Columbia, because of their genetic diversity, the ability to be able to adapt and move and adjust to things like climate change. We have 400 genetically distinct populations among the 5 species of Pacific salmon. We need that variety to ensure that we're going to have at least some of those populations that are going to be sustained.
Now here's the rub. With healthy ecosystems and species diversity, we can't hope to have healthy economies and healthy human societies. Here in Metro Vancouver, our forests ensure that steep slopes remain stable, that flood risks are lower, that our drinking water comes out of the tap filtered, cold, and clean.
The flow of water in lakes, streams and wetlands and groundwater systems is being seriously impacted in British Columbia by dams, water diversions, logging, stream crossings, and climate change. Special communities such as large wetlands, and in particular has been identified Burns Bog. Biodiversity is being reduced by our human activities. The more that ecosystems are modified by people, the less they are able to maintain their health, their resilience, and to be able to sustain themselves over time. Another significance in terms if we fragment our ecosystem, so it's sort of the counter to maintaining connectivity. If we block the sort of movement of our natural species, we will have alien species coming and moving in to take their place.
Scientists know what is causing this environmental crisis. Indeed, the loss of species and ecosystems affects not just the production of those economic commodities, but many non-market ecosystem services that sustain the health and well-being of our communities. These services regulate the climate and disease outbreaks and wastes. They include cultural services that provide aesthetic and recreational and spiritual value.
Estuaries are of concern in British Columbia because of their rarity and the level of human impacts. The Fraser River Estuary, as you all are well aware, and I think has been quite well documented in your information, is BC's most important areas for seasonal concentrations of birds. These estuaries, such as the Fraser, have experienced significant degradation as a result of human activities and are highly vulnerable to projected sea level rise due to climate change.
Recognition of the irreplaceable value of the ecosystem services and the impacts that human development are having on them is emerging globally. One of the most significant initiatives that has come out of the United Nations was the 2005 Millennium Ecosystem Assessment. It concluded that 2/3 of the direct benefits that we receive from nature are being degraded or used at an unsustainable rate. What's frightening is that we know so little about these ecosystem services that sustain us here in Metro Vancouver. For all we know, we are likely consuming these ecosystem services at a much greater rate that can be sustained by the remaining natural capital assets of our region.
The big one is increasing the awareness and the understanding about the importance and the value of biodiversity to all those in Metro Vancouver, whether this is through local government initiatives, whether this is looking at programs that look towards our children and how they understand biodiversity.
When you go home tonight, I want you to do something. I want you to stick your head in your fridge. If you stick your head in your fridge, probably about 1/3 of the food in your fridge came to you as a direct consequence of bumblebees and butterflies and other essential pollinator insects. The ecological economist Sarah Wilson jokingly referred to the honeybees that she tracked on her Excel sheets as flying $50 bills due to their enormous contribution to the economics of the region. Indeed, she estimated that pollination services alone are worth an estimated $300 million to the Southern Ontario's Greenbelt.
If we have our population understanding why to each of themselves having important and healthy biodiversity is important to them in their livability within this region, they're willing to support political decisions. We also need to make tools available, the enabling tools to bring biodiversity into the decision making, and thus to also provide a basis to measure and feedback to people on how we're doing.
So investing in programs to protect and enhance our natural capital in and around cities, such as our precious agricultural land reserve, is an effective fiscal savings measure. I'm honored to say that with the support of Metro Vancouver and charitable organizations like the Pacific Parklands Foundation, the David Suzuki Foundation will shortly be launching a similar study to enumerate and measure the contribution of ecosystem services in Greater Vancouver.
And collaboration is going to be an aspect going forward that is absolutely critical.
We can all play a part in implementing collaborative approaches with government agencies, nonprofit, private sector, community organizations, and landowners.
I'm encouraged by the fact that all three major political parties have actually put the protection of endangered species in their platforms. And the fact that last year the Federation of BC Municipalities passed a resolution calling on the government to bring in legislation to protect endangered species and ecosystems, and nearly a dozen mayors and councils have similarly passed resolutions in support of our campaign.
But we don't have a lot of time to waste.
Without immediate action, We are very vulnerable to rapid deterioration, and especially in light of climate change. It's not going to take a government initiative to do this. It's not going to take the non-government organizations to move on this. Everyone needs to take action. It cannot be done alone or by any one group.
Jan sent me everything that you have done, and we've had some extensive briefing about all of the incredible work that has gone on over particularly the last 2 or 3 years, and the major reports you've done on BC's biodiversity, what you've done in the Lower Mainland here. You've got a good base, and that's the key. You've done your homework, you've done your consultation, and it's not the what we have to work on now, it's the how.
So let us unite our creative energy and intelligence and work together to achieve a vision of a region rich of natural diversity with a network of habitats and healthy ecosystems that are valued and conserved.
Looks like California.
There's a value in this if it's is what we want.
Quite well respected, high profile. Another sort of way out there. Look, sliding is still ridiculous.
Hi, I'm Marcy Sandgrad. I'm with the Corporation of Delta, and I've been on the steering committee for the biodiversity strategy, but I'm here representing local government.
Because a lot of us are doing really innovative things, and I want to be able to connect with other people who have great ideas about some of the environmental policy challenges that all of us are facing.
Occasionally I'll go somewhere, like a couple weeks ago I was at Surrey City Hall for a water balance workshop. And I walked in there and I started looking at the brochures and I went, oh wow, they're doing all this cool stuff. And I sort of picked up all these brochures and stuck them in my briefcase and took them home and started sharing them with my friends and with some of the people I know in Burnaby.
But one of the things that I've found is often municipalities are competing with one another, and while competition is good, sometimes we lack cooperation.
Environmental planners and policymakers is information sharing, and I'd like to commit to starting some kind of communication between policymakers so that we are able to connect with each other when we're each individually struggling with an issue, that we can either use email or phone someone to talk to other individuals who've been working on it.
So as a result of the forum, I would challenge all of the local governments here to call up their neighboring municipalities and identify some projects, large or small, that they could work on together. And I would certainly do that with our neighbors in Surrey and Richmond, whether it's developing watershed plans or wildlife corridor plans, to identify some things that we could do that would be contributing to the regional biodiversity strategy rather than working on our individual municipal activities. Thanks.